Minimalists.
All right, we got some more questions here. It looks like we have several more surprise questions this week about to-do lists, about calendars, about digital productivity, about using social media for business, about curating photographs digitally. And I want to talk to Cal about digital minimalism for parents. That question came up, as well as the 1,600-person digital detox experiment that Cal did in his new book.
So I want everyone to know, dude, again, you don't have any social media presence, yet you were able to find 1,600 people to help with this. So going back to being relevant, you can absolutely stay relevant without being on Facebook.
All right, before we dive into the surprise questions, let's read some more about less. So Cal, each week we try to find a article here where we dissect a little bit of it, and it's really just a springboard for us to talk about some stuff that we're talking about today. The article I have here today is the New Yorker. It's from the New Yorker. It's called "The Machine Stops" by Oliver Sacks. My favorite aunt, Auntie Lynn, when she was in her 80s, told me that she had too much difficulty adjusting to all the things that were new in her lifetime. Jet planes, space travel, plastics, and so on. But that she could not accustom herself to the disappearance of the old. Where have all the horses gone? She would sometimes say. Born in 1892, she had grown up in a London full of carriages and horses. I have a similar feeling myself. A few years ago, I was walking with my niece Liz down Mill Lane, a road near the house in London where I grew up. I stopped at a railway bridge where I had loved leaning over the railings as a child. I watched various electric and diesel trains go by, and after a few minutes, Liz, growing impatient, asked, "What are you waiting for?" I said I was waiting for a steam train. Liz looked at me as if I were crazy. "Uncle Oliver," she said, "there haven't been steam trains for more than 40 years. I have not adjusted as well as my aunt did to some aspects of the new. Perhaps because the rate of social change associated with technological advances has been so rapid and so profound. I cannot get used to seeing myriads of people in the street peering into little boxes or holding them in front of their faces, walking blithely in the path of moving traffic." I see this all the time, especially in Los Angeles, where someone on their phone almost gets hit by a person on their phone who's in their car on their phone.
At a red light, you have like a 75% chance of the lane not moving because someone is stuck on their phone, not paying attention to the light turning green.
It's unbelievable. And we're seeing just more and more and more of it.
So I guess, like, is there any advice, Cal, on how to, I don't know, man, how to adapt to living life without social media? I don't know if that's a good question or not, but
well, I mean, something I think is worth emphasizing, and this is something that became clear when I was doing the book research. I didn't really understand this as much until I really got into it. Is that this model that Oliver is talking about of let's always be looking at the screen. We incorrectly think that that's just fundamental to the technology, right? That's what smartphones bring you. It's just this emergent behavior. It would be unusually radical not to do it. But if you look into it, it's actually much more recent and much more contrived than we think. Right. So the original model of the smartphone was a tool that did things you cared about really beautifully. Like, this was Steve Jobs' vision. He loved music. People loved to listen to music. It was going to be the best iPod he'd ever built. People make phone calls. That's important. It was going to be the best phone he'd ever built, and they're going to put it in the one beautiful object. Right. It was a minimalist.
It was basically merging your phone with your iPod at the time.
I talked to the developer lead for the original iPhone when I was researching the book, and he said 100%. Right. Wow. I mean, Jobs was a minimalist. Take things that people love, make the experience even better. Original social media, much more static, right? It was basically, it's a pain to set up your own blog, so we'll basically make it easier, right? You post about what you're doing, your friends post about what they're doing, you go on and see what they're up to. I mean, it was about connection, right? But it was very static. Maybe you would look at it a couple times a week. We did not use our phones all the time. This changed around the time that the major social media companies led by Facebook realized they had to get their revenue numbers way up because their investors wanted their return. The IPO was coming up. And so they re-engineered the entire social media experience to foster sort of compulsive checking. And this is when they shifted it away from you post and I post and made it more about social approval indicators. So now every time you tap the app, you can see how many likes you got, or how many favorites, or whether people tagged you in the photos. This was not in the original social media technology. It wasn't something that people were clamoring for.
So they built in addiction in a way.
They built in addiction, and all in an intentional way, right? And this is what actually transformed our relationship from our phones, from it being a tool where it's, hey, I need to look up directions. And I was like, this is great. This is beautiful. Like I can stretch and pull it. I can see the directions. It got me where I need to go. Then I put it away. It transformed it from that into I'm at the red light in LA. And even then I have to keep checking it. So the constant companion model, right? That's not fundamental to this tech. That was essentially invented as part of the business model of a small number of very large companies. It's not at all fundamental. It's basically what allowed, let's say, Facebook to jump to these massive valuations. But in order to get those valuations, they had to figure out how to get people to look at these things all the time. And so they engineered it for it. So what I try to push back on people is the weird thing is this. This is just you being a gadget in some sort of business model. You can go back and use these phones in the jobs you envision of beautiful devices that do useful things really, really well. It doesn't have to be something you're looking at all the time, and it doesn't have to be something that's even with you all the time.
Yeah.
Well, and that's,
I love that.
The GPS is another example of something that for me has become overused in a way. When my mother was dying and she was in St. Petersburg, Florida, it was before the GPS was ubiquitous on phones, and it still didn't work very well. This was 2008. And so you'd have to print stuff out from MapQuest still. But I learned the city, and I love St. Petersburg, Florida as a result. We own a coffee shop down there. And the reason that we fell in love with the community, I think part of it had to do with just learning the city, like being forced to sort of get lost. And one way to connect with a place and to connect with people is to get lost together in a way. So we do this thing called Screenless Saturdays now, where we basically there's 3 ways you can do it. You can do no social media on Saturdays, just to temporarily detox for a day. It's sort of dipping your toe in the water. The second way is no computer screens as well, so you can't work that day. And the third is just no screens at all. So that's like the extreme version. No screen at all. I'm not going to have my phone. I'm not going to have my TV. I'm not going to have my computer. And we find we have a lot of people who have been doing this along with us, but on Screenless Saturdays, the times when Bex and I, we completely turn off all screens, we just sort of drive around and get lost together. And you learn the city in a way that you're not relying on the technology, but then sometimes when you bring it back in, you realize like maybe you don't need it as much as you thought you did. You don't need that crutch anymore.
The first Screenless Saturday I did, completely screenless, Mariah and I were going on a hike north of Los Angeles, and we'd printed out directions there, and I was like, I could probably work my way back. I don't have to print out, there and back. But it's amazing how I forgot how actually easy it is for your brain to pick up on directions. Like it's something that it's almost doing ourselves a disservice when we rely on our smartphone to do every single thing for us. What I really like about this conversation too is like we're not stoics. We're not saying like get rid of your smartphone, delete everything. This is about being intentional with the technology that we have.
I'm gonna get back to this article here. I am most alarmed by such distraction and intention when I see young parents staring at their cell phones and ignoring their own babies as they walk or wheel them along. I'm gonna have to pause again.
Dude, go ahead.
No, I was driving through, I think it was Cheviot Hills. It's out by Century City here, and I was just driving. It's like, and my Google Maps was taking me through a side street because it was redirecting traffic basically, and I saw this parent with their stroller on their phone, and this is not made up. I'm driving down the street. The stroller starts rolling backward, spins around, tips forward into the street. The baby goes face first into the street.
Oh my God.
And a car is heading toward it.
Wow.
And it was like a scene from a movie. In fact, you write that into a movie, you're like
Untouchables, where the carriage goes down the steps.
It seems like I was looking at this like this is not even plausible in a movie. Like this is. But it happened right there in front of me because this person was both checking their mailbox and their phone at the same time.
It's like a metaphor.
Of multitasking.
I have seen I've seen memes of like women who have just given birth and they got their baby in one hand and they got their smartphone in the other. And it's like, that is where our priorities lie right now. It's, I just had a baby, so I do want to give this baby attention, but I also want to take advantage of this moment to broadcast it and to talk to all my friends about this moment, when, yes, we should just be focusing on our child.
Yeah.
But we've had ways to pacify ourselves for decades, hundreds of years even. This is a different kind. This is pacification on steroids in a way, right? Because before everyone had similar concerns, whether or not they're as valid. They had similar concerns with television, right?
But those were valid concerns. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
actually,
the question
turned out to be correct. I mean,
the question is, are they as valid, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe there's these degrees. The Stoics had concerns about books. They were like, throw away your books, right? Because it's pacification. You're not actually living in the world.
Yeah.
And so in a way, like, this is it's an old problem, but at the same time, it's a new problem, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so this comes up a lot, right? People, this is one of the gotcha questions I get a lot. Is, well, everyone was worried about every technology, and then the way this storyline often goes is, and then in the end, with all these other technologies, we ended up realizing that it was okay. And isn't this just the same thing? But there's really two things going on there. One, we weren't this worried about most technologies, right? So people definitely go back. I've seen this in technocriticism, and they'll find a little bit, one quote, they'll find Thoreau talking about, what if we connect Maine and Texas with a telegraph, and they have nothing to say, and say, see, people were really worried about the telegraph.
Yeah.
But people weren't really worried about the telegraph, right? I mean, for the most part, it didn't really change most people's lives. There's this period in the early 2000s when almost every techno-optimist book went back to this same dialogue of Plato, the Phaedrus dialogue, and said, look, here's Socrates in this dialogue basically saying the written word is bad. See, so we even worried that, like, the written word is bad, except for it's not really what he was saying, right? I mean, what he was saying is, like, the dialectical method where we go back and forth is a really important way to figure out truth. If you just read things, you don't have the actual interaction, you're not going to get at all the truths. We still actually agree with that. That's why we use the Socratic method in a lot of law schools, right? It wasn't like there was a general move against paper. So a lot of that is overblown. TV, though, is interesting because people got really worried about TV. And they're more or less correct.
Yeah.
Like, it completely changed the social fabric. We grew up with it, but this idea that it just became standard that you come home from work and you watch 5 hours of TV, like, that was incredibly disruptive. And then, so what's happening now with this sort of algorithmically optimized entertainment with our phones? Yes, I think it's also just as bad, if not worse, because now we have ubiquity.
Right. But I think with the TV, I think we're going to see this shift where it is effectively phased out. We had Andrew Schultz on the show, and I heard him talk about this, how your TV is just a really terrible giant phone. It doesn't do anything that your phone does, really. Even if you have a smart TV, it's the worst smartphone in the world. Yeah. And what we're going to see are iterations of TV, which are basically just bigger screens that are connected to your device, so we can multitask.
Dude, I'm guilty of it, man. Like,
so am I.
I'll sit there watching reruns of The Office on Netflix.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll be like, oh, while I'm on here, I might as well check I got my phone right here. I might as well check email, might as well. And that's where Screenless Saturdays have really kind of helped me overcome that. But yeah, I think we're all guilty of it.
I love the 4-year thing that you talked about recently. Can you shed a light on that?
The 4-year thing.
Yeah, leaving your phone in the foyer.
Oh, the foyer. Yeah.
I thought you said 4
years.
years.
Yeah. I was like, what did I do 4 years ago? Yeah. So I had an article about parenting and digital minimalism. It's not from my own insights. I mean, I have a whole mess of kids, but they're young. So, like,
how many kids do you have?
3.
Okay.
But the oldest is 6. So we're not quite thinking about this, but I'm meeting a lot of parents when I'm on the road, and they're really worried about it. Parents who have older kids, right? They're worried about it. And one of the lessons...
So Sean has 2 teenagers, for example. He has a 17-year-old, 15-year-old.
So Sean knows. Yeah, he's in the thick of this, right? Yeah. So one of the interesting ideas that was coming back is what parents are discovering is that modeling is really important, right? I mean, it's very hard to just, lay down this is bad for you, stop using this, I don't want you on social media so
Kids
much, hold
do
on.
What we do, not what we say.
Yeah, but hold on one second. I'm doing whatever, I'm checking whatever. And so this phone foyer method, basically the idea is, okay, when you're at home in the evening with your family, you leave the phone by the front door.
Yeah.
Right? It's where you put your wallet and your keys. And so if you need something, you go and you look it up. And if you're expecting some text message, you can go check. but you're doing it there, not around other people, right?
So I did this for a long time, and for whatever reason, when I moved, I stopped doing it. But so when I did the experiments of, I started I got rid of my TV when my marriage ended 10 years ago. And then I moved into an apartment, just didn't get a new TV, right? And then when I moved again, because I was downsizing, I didn't hook up internet for, I'm going to try this out for a month. It was so productive, but of course I had this cheat in my pocket. Like, I got internet right here. It was a BlackBerry at the time, so it wasn't a great cheat, but it was a cheat nonetheless. But then I moved where the charger was, and I always kept that phone on the charger while I was at home, so if I needed to go text, I had it there. And you learn about a special kind of loneliness because you realize how much you pacified yourself with no TV, no home internet, no phone, and then I ended up getting rid of the phone for 2 months, and I realized, like, oh, well, I'm twitching for all these things. I want the junk food, I want the sugar, and I was like going through a sort of this toxic detox.
Yeah. Well, when we look at these pacifiers, I think there are statistics that can tell us like the way this technology is affecting our society. So I look at things like millennials are having, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a significant amount less that millennials are having sex. And it's because it has a lot to do with this age we live in, with, you know, whether it's pornography or whether it's like checking your phone all the time. But we are distracting ourselves to the point where we want to have sex less.
Well, didn't you probably know the stats on this, but there's some absurd percentage that is greater than zero of people using their smartphone while having sex.
Yeah.
It's like a large percentage.
It's
crazy. Yeah.
I mean, other than for filming, I can't imagine what you would use the smartphone for.
Live tweeting? Is that
Don't forget this on Periscope.
Oh, that is hilarious. Well, there's a point you make in your book too about how I think it was a teacher that was saying how different the students are now because of smartphones, and how, I mean, we really could be heading towards this this crisis of mental health because of what smartphones are doing. And it's not like us three old guys sitting here being like, smartphones are going to destroy mental health.
Kids, I mean, these days.
Right, kids these days. There's like numbers to back this up.
Well, the commissioner of the NBA was talking about this recently. Did you see that? What's his name? Adam Silver?
Yeah. I didn't see him talking about it, but I bet I know what study he's talking about.
Well, he was referring to, well, just the mental health of the players in the league, because I mean, you got to think about it. They're young, super young. They're 18 to 25, a lot of them, and they have access. All of a sudden, they have millions of followers.
Yeah,
and their agents are on them.
Yeah,
their agents. What I've been hearing, their agents are on them. Your brand matters. Yeah, you gotta be on there.
Yeah.
The coaches hate it.
Of course. Yeah. And there are it's weird because you can also use it as a tool. The best example for me of a famous person using it as a tool to connect with people is Will Smith and what he's done recently. I don't know, have you seen anything that I think the age of the sort of universal superstar who is completely removed from the people is gone, and the new universal superstar is constantly connected. You mentioned the Kardashians earlier. Donald Trump is a phenomena of this weird connectivity, right? Connecting directly to the people. But Will Smith, what he did is he's like, oh, okay, I've made 4 or 5 movies that haven't gone great, and I need a way to connect with people.
I loved Wild Wild West.
I think that was
is that peak Will Smith, right?
and I think what he realized is like, oh, you take someone who has real talent and a budget, I can do something that's truly entertaining on social media, but it's not the snacking. It's like he's doing 60-second feature films in a way. You have a real like professional who's doing that. Most of us are so amateurs that we've. Well, it's in the subtitle of your book. It's a noisy world for a reason, because we're all talking now. Not all of us have a lot to say.
Yeah, we're not all Will Smith,
right?
In terms of everyone, yeah. But that's the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was like, what's it? Convincing the world doesn't exist. It's like here, the greatest trick the digital devil has ever pulled is tricking everyone into thinking that they're really important to a lot of people, right?
Well, it's
not
so
that people
true.
aren't important, but the idea that you're important to this audience, that there's this audience that's out there that really cares, where the people that you really want to be important for, it's the friend who's right here. It's your kids. It's your parents. It's like the local community, right? And but it's tricked us into believing. I mean, one of the worries people have about stepping away from social media, like doing any of these sort of declutters, is, well, my fans are going to miss me.
Oh,
no,
are they really going to miss you?
They're not. Yeah,
they don't care.
And if they're true fans, they'll be there when you get back.
But and these aren't media personalities. I mean, it's just people. But it's just the way. It's the way we've been conditioned to think.
Yeah, I think the other thing that tricks us too sometimes is we look at these tools and we ask that question. Does this add value to our lives, or does it support our values? And we trick ourselves in saying, yes, this device or this platform or whatever it is, it does add value. But with all of these different platforms we have, there is a mixed bag of value, and then there's also this harm that it causes. So whenever we're looking at these platforms, like the way Will Smith is using Instagram, I haven't really went through it, but it sounds to me like he is using it to add value, but that's where you've got to be honest with yourself and ask, like, is this doing more harm than it is value? Because when it does add a little bit of value, just like hitting the like button or hitting the haha button, it's like we feel like we're adding a little bit of value, because it is supporting a value of, yes, I want to support a friend, I want to show my friend that that I'm there for them, but it's kind of doing more harm than good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is something you notice with Digital Minimalist, is that they always go beyond the binary question, like, do I use this or not? And they ask the follow-up question, how and when.
Yeah.
And that makes, 90% of the difference there.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
like, a lot of visual artists, for example, have told me that Instagram is key. Because, I mean, the whole game in visual art is that you have to be exposed to what other people are doing. You can't be creative without actually having lots of inputs. That's why you used to have to live in one of 3 cities, because you had to be near the galleries. If you couldn't see what other people were doing, you couldn't do new art. So Instagram has blown this open. It's been great for the art world. It means because people post what they're working on.
Yeah.
Right? But the digital minimalists I know that are visual artists, and they go through the whole sort of exercise of, what do I value? What am I using? How am I using it? What a lot of them do is like, okay, well, I don't need to let that be an excuse to just be doing this all the time. So they take it off the phone. They completely curate like you did. They go down to, like, here's 10 artists I'm going to follow, and that's it. They do it on their desktop computer. They do it like once a week. It's like 15 minutes they can see what's been posted. And now they're getting 99% of the value out of the tool. And avoiding like all the cost.
10% of the time or less. Yeah. I think of my former partner, Colleen. She has been doing, she's a visual artist. She does these like amazing, very surreal Lynchian sort of collages, and awesome. And she's been doing one every day since 2012, and has not missed a day since 2012. Rain or shine, sick or in health, she has done these collages, and in a weird way, it's like having an accountability partner there, and she has found a way to gamify it without them gamifying her. And that is the other problem, with Snapchat and the kids who are giving their passwords to their friends to log in for them
to keep up the streak.
The streaks.
The streaks. And so there can be a good, like the Colleen thing with the streak. She's keeping up her own streak. She's holding herself accountable through publishing, the same way you would if you're Seth Godin and you're blogging every day, right? It's actually very similar to that. Her platform is just is Instagram. With Matt Diavella, the director of our documentary, he posts like a short documentary once a week on YouTube, and he must put 40 or 50 hours into each one. It's 7 minutes long, and he does that every week, but it's a way for him to stay accountable. It's a way for him to broadcast, because people are getting value from it. It's this weird thing that it's a double bind, because the thing I tell writing students quite often is you are simultaneously more interesting and less interesting than you think. The things that are interesting to you probably aren't that interesting to other people, but there is something about you, something you've learned, some pains you've gone through that you've learned from, that maybe someone else can get value from. And I think, Cal, you've done a good job of, and so maybe we transition past this article here because it's a long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You did a good job in your book just sort of distilling down different people's experiences. So it wasn't just like, well, one Georgetown professor says you need to get off social media. It was like, hey, let's try this little experiment. So before we get into the experiment that you did, I'm just going to read this bit from the end of the article here that I have underlined. He's talking about younger people, for the most part, who have grown up in our social media area, have no personal memory of how things were before. and no immunity to the seductions of digital life. And that word seduction really stands out to me, because seduction, the definition there is, one of the definitions is to offer more than you can deliver. That is how you seduce someone. It's over-promising, and then ultimately it can't deliver. When we see the beautiful curation of a lifestyle on Instagram, it's like, yeah, you can't have that. You can't have the Instagram life and simultaneously be fulfilled, I think.
Well, it goes back to the gamifying social media. I mean, it's funny because until you talked about that little section about how social media is kind of like gambling, I think you even brought it up in your book, or maybe I thought about it, but like Twitter, to even like refresh, you have to pull down.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a slot machine. You got to pull down.
It's intentional.
Yeah. And then it goes down, and then you see a little circle, and you're like, oh, what other notifications am I going to get? And then it goes back up. Oh, I got notifications. Like me. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, the end of this, he says, what we are seeing and bringing on ourselves resembles a neurological catastrophe on a gigantic scale. Yeah. And I think that's the part that is most different now, the sort of those two words, neurological catastrophe. Because yes, TV did change the landscape to a great extent, at least for a period of time. But in a weird way, we're back into the golden age of radio now. We're on a radio show right now, right? It just happens to be delivered slightly differently. Instead of over your FM radio, it is delivered through, other radio waves, through Wi-Fi. But the thing that's different now is, man, we're rats in the wheel, and it is a neurological catastrophe. It's Pavlovian in a way.
It is weird too, because like the digital world, hearing that it's a neurological catastrophe makes me think that we're overworking our brains. Yeah. But it's actually doing the opposite. Would you agree with that, or?
Well, there's all sorts of neurological issues.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that's causing a lot of trouble is this notion that for the first time in human history, you can banish all solitude from your life. Right. I mean, and by solitude, I just mean time when you're not processing input from another mind.
Yeah.
It used to be completely unavoidable, because you would be in line, you'd be whatever, you'd be waiting for the bathroom, you would be just walking out to your car, like you just throughout your day had a lot of time when it was just you alone with your own thoughts, which is a very different neurological mode than I am processing input from another person. That's like all hands on deck in our brain, right? Like if I'm listening to Ryan, like it's all hands on deck, like I'm watching, I'm thinking, this is something we really care about, social interaction. Yeah. Having ubiquitous high-speed wireless internet and smartphones meant for the first time in human history, you can take every single moment of potential solitude and get rid of it, right? Yeah. Have something to look at, something to process. This is causing trouble. It's causing, among other things, anxiety, because the brain, it's not used to this. It's getting none of the background maintenance cycles. It's also really reducing our ability to have insights about ourselves or insights about our work. There's a lot of value that comes out of just being alone with your own thoughts. And we've blithely just banished this.
Yeah.
Now it seems to me that reading, it does both in a way. If you sit down, you can have time in solitude. If you're reading, then you are digesting someone else's thoughts, so that's not solitude. But then you can pause whenever you want, and in fact, when I'm reading, I frequently pause and consider the thing. So I don't know, where does that fall in your definition of solitude?
Well, I mean, reading's not a state of solitude, but we never had an issue before where people were reading all the time, right? Every time they were in line and when they were driving in between cars, while
getting a book out at a red light.
Getting a book out on the red light. I mean, my grandfather used to do that famously, but it wasn't good.
No, and we see those examples of that. I remember there's a part in our book, Everything That Remains, and it's an actual scene that happened. I was driving on I-71 to Cincinnati, and it's bumper to bumper traffic, some of the worst traffic in the country is in Cincinnati. And as I'm going south, I'm stopped. We're going 0 miles an hour. I look to my right, and the person in the driver's seat has a newspaper over the wheel.
I love it.
and a bowl of cereal in their hand. Man. Like the worst kind of multitasking here. Yeah. And just milk is dripping down their chin as they're reading the paper. And we looked at that like, oh, that's not right.
Yeah.
But now we look at it and say, oh yeah, I do that too.
Yeah. So that's,
we've normalized it.
So that's a problem, right? Lack of solitude. The other problem is taking this sort of social processing hardware that again is incredibly specialized. It's the story of our species' success is that we have these social supercomputers that can do this. Yeah. Like I can talk with you guys. I can look at your facial expressions. I can practice limbic consonants, where I try to match the pacing. I'm doing something called mentalizing right now, where I'm building a model of your mind in my mind so that I can test against this model how you would react to different things. I mean, right? It's a social supercomputer, but it's evolved for I'm with people. You know, people I've known for a long time. We're in person. We're interacting. This just messes with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't know how to deal with like a comment, you know, like a bad tweet or something like that, right?
Because
I mean,
we treat it as if the person's right across
because
from
our
us.
brain doesn't know the difference, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my God, like someone in my tribe is really mad at me. Like I'm going to get a spear in the back, like red alert, right? But it's some rando on Twitter, or the likes coming in, that I get more likes or not likes. Our brain is seeing this as like we're around the campfire, and I can see that, you know, the tribe mates are unhappy with me. Like this is a serious issue, right? I need to manage the social dynamic. So this brain does not know at all how to deal with this sort of artificial sociality that was sort of, again, schemed up in a dorm room at Harvard, you know, 15 years ago, right? It's not some grand experiment. So that's also, and then the final thing is we're losing the ability to concentrate. And this is one of the issues. I mean,
I've totally seen that.
Attention spans are,
and this has economic consequences. I mean, it has huge consequences to quality of life for sure. If you can't just be present in a moment, you can't concentrate on something that you're seeing, if you can't concentrate in conversation, it's having economic consequences. I mean, non-industrial productivity metrics have been stagnant throughout this last 10 years of all this technological innovation. We have a whole generation of people entering the workforce that are incredibly uncomfortable with sustaining attention at the same time that our economy is shifting more and more towards the thing we do is have brains concentrate and produce value. We're going towards this high level knowledge economy where this is like the most important resource we have. This is our oil fields, right? And we're getting worse and worse at using it. So he's right. I mean, Sachs is right about this, is that what's happening to our brain is really non-trivial. And you're right, TV did this too, but you watch TV in the evening.
Well, yeah, you couldn't pacify yourself all day with it because it was not available.
And nothing good was on the weekends. So you still had to go to the Rotary Club and to your woodshed and go on hikes with your kids and stuff like that, right?
That's
I mean, it was only there, you know, Thursday night primetime was pretty good.
Right.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, like, I noticed with my daughter, and you probably noticed with your kids, if they watch something, if you give them access to a video, like, they just want more and more and more of it. But we're not so different. You know, maybe we have a more fully developed frontal cortex, but ultimately, like, I want that same, it's what David Foster Wallace called food pellets from the universe. And like, I kind of just want those food pellets. It's that very, they're not very nourishing, but at least it's something that I can chew on. Yeah. So let's talk about this experiment you did that sort of was the precipice of the book. Was 1,600 people? Is that right?
Yeah. So I have this method, which is a little bit more self-helpy than I normally get in my writing, but like it turned out this was kind of unavoidable, right? So I have this 30-day idea. I call it the declutter, where you take 30 days, you step away from all the optional tech. It's not just about a detox. So it's about giving yourself the space to actually figure out, what am I actually all about? What are my values? What do I want to spend my time on? I mean, most people don't have an answer to this, right? Because they've been pacifying. They've been pacifying the boredom. So you experiment and you figure out, okay, this is what I'm about. This is what I want to spend my time doing. And then when the 30 days are over, now you can do the whole minimalist game. Oh, is this tech really very valuable? Is it really going to boost one of these things I really care about? If no, then I can ignore it and be comfortable with it. And if so, all right, maybe I'll bring it back, but I'll put some rules around it. So I wanted to test this idea, and so I put a call out to my readers. Does anyone want to try this? I'm just curious. And I thought it was going to be like 24 people. I mean, I literally thought like, oh, I'll go hang out with these people. Like I can see how it's going. I can profile them in the book or whatever. And that's where 1,600 people signed up, which showed that there was a hunger for this. But hearing their reports, I learned a lot about why you need something like this 30 days, but also why it works and why it sometimes doesn't work. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting nuance involved in this shift. And one of the biggest things I learned is that if you treat something like this like a detox only, it's not going to stick. Right? If you just say like, I just want to take a break, and then everything will be better, it doesn't work. It's hard to even make it through the 30 days. The people who succeeded were the people who put in the effort during those 30 days to actually figure out sort of like, what the hell am I about? You know, to ask those questions that they've been putting off because you can pacify. Now, without the ability to pacify, they're feeling that boredom. They're feeling lonely. They're wondering like, okay, what should I do? And those who actually thought like, okay, what does matter? Let me experiment. Let me sign up for some things. Let me invite some people over. Let me go to the library. Like, let's try to figure out high quality activities for my time, the type of stuff boredom used to drive us to do. The people who did that when the 30 days were over, no trouble being minimalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that they all left social media.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about half came back to some social media, though almost none of them had it on their phone.
Yeah.
And about half left, but it's not about good tech and bad tech.
Mm.
It's about before they were just, hey, if anything is valuable or potentially convenient, let me just try it. And after, they sort of knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And then these things just became tools that they got some big wins out of, but
Yeah.
wasn't dominating their time.
There are great examples in your book of people who, like, they went back to Facebook, but it's very honed in, it's very dialed in, like, you know, laser focused on why they use Facebook.
Yeah.
It's a great experiment.
What about parents? Digital minimalism for we touched on that a little bit, but as our kids get older and they become these sort of social outcasts if they're not on it.
Yeah.
And so we're in this weird situation where it feels like we're depriving them, although the thing that we give them will also deprive them of something that's even more meaningful.
Well, you know, there's change. There's change out there coming, right? One of the things I've been hearing on the road is that the teenagers themselves are getting tired of this. Like they don't like the Snapchat streak thing, right? I mean, it feels like work, right? The fact that it's like their job. They have to be up in their room managing all of these sort of social games so they can keep the revenue numbers high, right? At these giant corporations.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. It's not even the revenue numbers for them.
Yeah.
And so, like, I understand the question earlier about how my business being relevant on social media, although I think social media is ancillary at best unless you are unless there's a particular need for it. Social media is, to me, it augments all the creations that we do. And that's how Ryan and I use social media now. We hired a person who takes our words, so it's everything that we write, and curates it in a way that a museum curator would, and makes it beautiful, because she was a curator for several art galleries. And so what Jess does is she takes the stuff that we would want on social media, and she finds the most beautiful way to get it out there, so we can add value using those vehicles, but not needing to constantly check. Although I worry about this, Cal. So tell me if I'm doing something wrong here. I worry that we're adding to the noise, and it's something I continue to worry about, even though we try to do a very good job of only doing things that will add value. It's none of the look at me. It's none of the envy my life stuff. It's like, hey, here's something I think will be helpful. But by putting it on Facebook, am I perpetuating the problem, or am I combating it using the tool, Facebook as a tool?
So I'm curious. I mean, let me ask you, and this is actually an honest question, because I don't know the dynamics. I don't know the dynamics of these businesses. Like, as a thought experiment, like, let's say that you guys left all social. Right? I mean, still YouTube,
For
right?
what period of time?
No, let's just say that was the decision, right?
In perpetuity.
Yeah, you have your podcast, and the video's still on YouTube. That's fine, because where else are you going to host video? But let's just say...
we could host it elsewhere, maybe.
Or elsewhere, but I mean, the point is, like, the video platforms, it's a slightly different thing, right?
Yeah, I do agree.
Yeah, because what it's offering
it's
is...
not vapid. It's like, it's much more meatier,
and it's I mean, there's other video platforms, but there's kind of a technological service there. But so... let's walk through the thought experiment. So what would happen? Like, I mean, what if, like, all the official Twitter and Facebook accounts said, we kind of recommend that you get off this?
Well, dude, I'll tell you a story. I woke up one day and I was like, I'm going to just get off of Twitter right now. Like, I don't want to be on here anymore. So I delete Twitter.
Nice.
And it was about 3 hours later, I get a text from Josh. He's like, did you delete your Twitter, or did you block me on Twitter or something? And I'm like, yeah, I deleted Twitter. And he's like, dude, he goes, that's not a problem. He said, except we just sent all of the numbers to our agent who was working out a publishing deal for our book.
Yeah.
And part of my social media following is included in those numbers.
Yeah. Do they care more about email lists now?
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And we have that too, and
which comes from blogs, which is actually a technology I'm a huge booster of.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's the best decision that we ever made was to start our blog 8+ years ago.
Yeah.
And for me, my favorite social media share button is the forward email button from people, right? Because you're much more likely to actually read the email if I send it to you than if I were to post something on Facebook and you're like, what is this? I'm really interested.
Yeah. But it probably would be a problem. I mean, I'm actually curious about it.
Right? I am too. I don't know the answer to that.
Because you have to be, if you're in like if you have a media brand like you guys do, you have to be in the public eye in some sense.
Top of mind.
You have to be top of mind, and it used to be, I guess you'd want to get in magazines or be guest on shows. I mean, I don't know what people used to do, but you had to do a lot of effort. I mean, is this replicating that for you, or what would happen?
I think for us, we're vehicle agnostic, meaning we don't care what we use to get our story, to get our message out there. Like what we do, we feel is important in the sense that it adds a tremendous amount of value to a lot of people. So yeah, I don't, Josh, you're going to be able to speak to this better than I.
I agree with the vehicle agnostic thing in terms of we want to use the best platform to share a particular message.
So if we deleted Facebook, Instagram, Twitter right now, Joshua Fields Milburn, Ryan Nicodemus, and the Minimalists, all those deleted, what kind of impact do you think that would have on us?
Well, Jess wouldn't have a job,
right? We can find something else for her to do. But okay. Yeah. So
would listen numbers go down?
What?
I mean, like, is this the drive? This is probably the main driver. You would say your podcast at the moment, or the movie?
It depends. The documentary did really well. The website, our email list. There's a lot of people on that. But email's becoming strangely less relevant too, because everyone has Gmail and they've relegated the emails to the promotions tab. I'm sure you've gone through this with your own blog.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And what it means is people, and if they have it set up, if they don't have it set up a particular way, they're less likely to actually read your email. Just like Twitter, because email is an equally noisy place, and you and I have had conversations about the craziness of that. Where would we be if we got rid of all of our social media accounts? We'd be fine. Would we be able to have the same impact, add the same amount of value without them? No, I don't think so.
Well, we kind of did this as an experiment last year, right?
Yeah. So January of 2018, we hopped off social media for a month with the intention of coming back as a reset. Saying how can we best use these platforms going forward? Because before then, we felt like we're being like self-promotion-y, and that's not what we want to be. I don't want to be the promo guy on social media. It's okay to say, hey, I wrote a book and I'd like for you to read it, but I don't want to beat people over the head with the thing.
Like we were just basically having something to say, but it was the same thing on each platform.
Right. It was like doing the thing in triplicate where you sign fill out the form, and then like you post it on Facebook, repost it on Instagram, and then repost it on Twitter. Yeah. And it was like, oh, that's not what these platforms are for. Like Twitter has a specific purpose. It's prose, it's text. Facebook for me is best for sharing articles. So that's how we use those two platforms. Instagram, we share beautiful photos with a short little essay or something, a minimal maxim. And so we use the platforms differently now in a very intentional way. And I will tell you this, it has probably hurt us if I were focused on shares or revenue or whatever. Ryan and I have been fortunate in that we've never had anything that's gone viral, ever.
That's interesting. It's hard to believe.
I know, right?
The documentary.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, it's hard to really look at the numbers at that. And again, that's viral in a different way. That's algorithmic in a sense.
But you're not chasing the viral high.
No. And anytime I have found myself doing that, if you talk to Jess, I've never once said, hey, we need to get, because she works with other folks as well. Intentional.social is her website if anyone's interested. But she works with other folks, and it's funny, like they'll come to her and say, I need you to get our account to, you work for the Minimalists and they have 1 million followers. I need you to do that in 6 months. And she's like, okay.
I'm not the person for you.
He's like, well, you can buy followers, but that's not the thing that I do. That's not what we do. We go out of our way to add value, and then hopefully, if people get value from it, they follow. If they don't, we actively encourage people to unfollow us too. Yeah. So I feel like I'm using it in a way that is congruent with the way that we want to broadcast. But if it is that big of a problem, I just worry that we're adding to the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree, Josh. It's because I think about we started with Instagram stories.
Yeah.
And then we started doing Instagram. Well, then Facebook came out with stories. So now we're going to do Facebook stories.
Stories are what?
It's like snippets into your life. They're up for 24 hours.
Snapchat, basically.
Is it videos?
Or?
It's
or
pictures,
Okay.
Basically Snapchat.
You're familiar with Snapchat as a platform? You've never used it, but you're familiar with what it is?
I know about Snapchat streaks, but more from the research literature.
Okay,
I'm such a nerd with this stuff.
Instagram has their ephemeral stories, 15-second bits of ephemera that go away after one day.
But it is like this fear of missing out when these when these social media platforms that we're used to using and they come out with a new feature, it is this fear of missing out. Oh man, we got to get on that if we want to
so what if that's the next big thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, first mover
so
advantage.
I don't know, Milburn. It's worth having a conversation about to see what
Well, the irony would
Can and
be
can't do.
if the
Or put on our
minimalists
plates.
came out and were very publicly like, we're not using social media because we don't think you should be on it this much
Right.
yourselves. It would be this weird trade-off that you would lose engagement, but it would also
Yeah.
probably boost your right because there's something so
Yeah.
countercultural about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the very least, so think about how intentional you guys are, right? I mean, you're talking about how much thought goes into exactly how you use these, why you use these. Notice like your guys' usage of social media has nothing in common with people on the phone at the stoplight, right? I mean, like you have professionals that do certain things, and so I have a chapter in the book about if you're using social media, use it like professionals.
Yeah.
Because when you look at how professionals use it, it has nothing to do with looking at your phone at every moment. It's schedules and systems, and it's data driven, and it's not. So like Instagram is probably not something that eats up a lot of your time.
No,
No, I don't.
Well, you know what though? We could be eating up someone else's time.
That's-
though.
well, yeah,
For
so
example, with Instagram stories, like
Yeah.
that is something that is ephemeral. People pull out at the stoplight, they're going through their stories or Facebook stories or whatever it is. So we're not, it's not eating up our time personally, but what we're doing is we are adding to the noise and eating up other people's time.
We're asking for people's most precious resource, which is their attention.
Yeah.
And so hopefully, if I'm being charitable about what Ryan is saying there, maybe what we're doing is a better job of eating up their time than if they were to look at the Kardashian post or whatever.
Like we are giving them something meaningful that they can digest, that they can take an ingredient from, and they can apply to their own lives. That hopefully enables them to live a more meaningful life.
I agree.
But I'll tell you too that like when we're on tour, it's fun to do like goofy, silly stuff and have that engagement with our audience too, to show that like, hey, we don't take ourselves that seriously, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the other place where I do get value from using, especially Twitter, is following Twitter comics or just comics in general. So like Chris D'Elia or Anthony Jeselnik are two that really stand out to me, who use Twitter really well. They use it to broadcast, but I get value. Like I will laugh out loud at stuff they do, and I actually will seek it out. It's funny, like if I really want to get on Twitter, I don't even go to twitter.com. The first place I go is twitter.com/Anthony Jeselnik. And so like I don't even need to follow him.
Right.
I'm sure I probably do, but I don't need to because it's a destination for me. And that's what we were talking about earlier. We were talking about unfollowing everyone. Then you go back to what are the real destinations for you. But even that can become such a problem. YouTube for me, it's like I have to get it out of my life because it is my crack.
Or get the recommendations turned off. I mean, this is a thing. Get these plugins. So
Right.
there's a lot of these minimalists do it who need YouTube because whatever, right? They need the how-to instructions for how to change their oil or whatever. It's good for these things.
No, it's very useful.
But they get these plugins that wipes away the algorithmic recommendations.
I'm gonna try that one out for sure.
Yeah.
Let me know what you use because
We had a recommendation, I think, from James Clear. So let's go look that up. Podcast Sean, what recommendation? The YouTube plugin from James Clear. I'm going to start using that. I know we only have about 20 minutes left with Cal, so let's dive into some of these surprise questions here. What has Podcast Sean queued up for us? Let's hear from Corinne from Patreon.
Most of my photos from the end of high school through all of my college years are sitting in film cartridges because throughout the years as a minimalist, I've really only kept the printed photos that mean the most to me. So today, there are an abundance of companies that will digitize your old films and memories. And I've recently been wondering whether to do it so that I can finally get rid of the actual film cartridges. I'm torn over whether or not it'll be a worthy investment. To digitize all of my old film would probably cost me well over $1,000. A part of me says it would be wonderful to have a copy of all the pictures from my student days and my travels. Another part of me wonders if they're just going to end up lonely in a hard drive and essentially become digital clutter. The old camera film doesn't add value sitting in a drawer as opposed to the joy of reliving the memories through the digital versions, but it is a really hefty investment to go full on digital. So I'd love to know your thoughts and what advice do you have for those of us who experienced life before the digital age?
So this one's relatively easy for me. There's something on our website called a scanning party, basically. So you put party at the end of anything, it becomes instantly fun.
And I'll show up with a 6-pack.
That's right. And he's talking about his abs.
Right.
So basically you invite some friends over, and so you go through those photos together. You scan the ones that are relevant that you think you want to hold on to, and what you'll realize, like, I have all these pictures of thumbs or people I don't even know who they are, and all of these just random pictures you don't want. So you have two options. One, yeah, you can send it off to a place like $1 Scan. It sounds like it's going to cost you $1,000. What's the opportunity cost there? I don't know. Is there a better way for you to spend that $1,000? Maybe, probably, unless they're that important to you. Or you can buy, a $100 scanner or $50, however much that scanner is that we use. If you can put a link to that in the show notes, Sean. Ryan and I share this little photo scanner, and they're quick now. It's not the old printer scanner where like you fold up the thing and you put the photo down and fold it back down and hit 7 buttons. You just feed them through there. It's like a document scanner, but for photos. And so awesome. Yeah, it's really easy. But you can do that with friends and actually have an experience out of it instead of just having them in cartridges somewhere or in a box somewhere. You just have friends over who will help you curate those photos together and turn it into an experience.
I personally like digital photos because that means I don't have a bunch of photo albums, and I do like going through and looking at Mariah and I's past travels. Like, seriously, like, well, again though, that's one way I'll pacify myself is I'll pull up my digital photos and I'll just start flipping through. I'm like, oh yeah, and like, because pictures do spark some memory. What do you do with your photos, Kyle?
I'm an analog guy, right? So my thought is once a year you go through your digital photos and you build an album. And then you have it. Like, there's the album for the year, right? Yeah. It's going to last your whole life. It's a very durable storage medium.
It's a very good way curated.
And then you have it, right? And those are your best photos.
Yeah. And the way that the reason I like the scanning of photos, for me, is I have a backup. So if anything happens to those albums, so if you're taking the digital and then making them analog, you still have some sort of backup. Although ultimately, like, I guess the ultimate stoic approach is if they all get lost tomorrow, then we can move on.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Jasmine in Germany.
As a digital creative or content creator, how do you deal with unpublished files? As blogger, I always struggle if some of the texts or photos on my laptop could bring value to someone, even though I think they're not good enough for that. Since people told me that they get value from stuff which I posted, although I thought it would be useless, it drives me crazy to decide if something is worth it to be kept or if it's just digital junk.
So Cal, you run across this. You write a lot, and I'm assuming the vast majority of everything you've ever written has not been published.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, if you talk to a lot of writers, I don't think the value in an incomplete draft is not, I can go back and take this draft and work on it. I think the value is I thought through this idea to some degree, right? And so you've worked it through, and then so if that idea is a good one, then at some point maybe you want to return to it. But almost always you're probably better off starting from scratch at that point. So I mean, I see drafts as sort of practice runs, and the notion that it's going to save time to go back to an incomplete draft. Man, I go crazy if I kept all of those things, right? So you try some things. I worked on this, it didn't really work. A week later, 5 months later, you kind of come back to that idea. You've been stewing on it. If it keeps coming back to you, then you think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And writers don't like to go back to old drafts anyways, right? You always feel like, me today, I'm a better writer than I was, 3 weeks ago. I don't want to edit this crappy thing. I want to take another swing at it.
That is such a good point.
I think that with respect to any creative endeavor, a lot of the, it's the, whatever you want to call it, the 10,000 hours, it's going through the process. What we've taken away with the instant public, although I'm the hugest fan of blogging and everything else, but we treat everything as if it's publishable now. Yeah. And that's what we've tried to do with social media. We've realized, like, no, everything isn't publishable. Let's use social media just as a platform, like you would a blog or like you would a documentary. Let's use this platform going forward. But that means most of what we create, we don't publish. Yeah. And another good example of this is our documentary. I think Matt ended up with somewhere close to 2,000 hours worth of footage for a 79-minute film. And I know every book that we've written has been over 500 pages at its bloated zenith. To edit it down to something that is more palatable.
What do you think Matt did with all that? The other 1,999 hours of footage he didn't use.
They're mostly sunrises. I bet they're in sunset time lapses.
Time lapses,
on his TV.
You guys looking pensive,
right?
In the shadows, looking profound.
No, you made a really good point, Cal. Because when I think about like some essays in the past that I started writing and then went back to it 6 months later, a year later, the idea was still there. but I'm like, yeah, I'm scrapping this, and I am going to start from scratch.
Yeah.
So maybe the advice for Jasmine here is put a timeline on how long you are willing to hold on to this creation. And then once that 6 months is up, once that year is up, give yourself permission to let go. But to hang on to something, to just say, oh, maybe one day it'll be a good idea. Okay, yeah, maybe. But the work that you put into it is probably going to look much different years from now than what it'll look like when you first started it.
I know I've already mentioned David Foster Wallace once in this podcast, so I'm going to mention him a second time and then I'll stop. His second book, which is called Westward, it's a short story collection, but the end of it is like a 100-page novella. It's like the last story in there, and he was an analog guy as well, and so he had it printed out in his back seat, and it got stolen out of his car, and it was his only copy. So he had to go back and rewrite the thing, and he had to do it. He did it in like 3 weeks somehow. And he said that experience made the book a whole lot better.
Wow.
I don't know that would always be the case, but in a weird way, I think what you're saying is true. Like if I had to go back and rewrite
everything that
remains, I don't know if it'd definitely be a technically better book, but the essence of it was also like it was so long ago. Like it captured the 32-year-old mindset, which is totally different from my 37-year-old mindset. So it was a little bit different. But ultimately, I think we need to get comfortable with creating without publishing. And I think publishing helps keep us accountable. So having some sort of publishing schedule will help you, but not feeling the need not everything that leaves your quill is profound.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, what's the other line too that you say? I don't know if it's your line or you stole it from David Foster Wallace. If you treat everything as precious, then nothing is precious.
Yeah. That's. I think it's a minimal maxim of ours.
Oh yeah.
If everything is precious, then nothing is precious. Right. And that is the problem. And how we're creating now, we act as if everything that we do is so profound. And as a writer, I don't know if you experience this, especially when you first started writing.
Yeah.
You didn't for me, like I wrote a lot of fiction throughout my 20s, and unbeknownst to me, a lot of it was shitty fiction. But to me, everything was precious. But that was also why it was shitty, because all of it was precious to me.
Yeah. Well, and having to bury that's one of the unexpected consequences, positive consequences of some of the barriers that are out there. Like it was hard to publish book. I mean, it's hard to publish in a magazine or fiction, but hey, that meant that you got to take a lot of swings and hone. And you're right, the social media age makes it feel like everyone cares about everything I have to say. Also, I think there's a sort of influence from the internet marketing world that I feel creeping into, and maybe it's creeping into this question a little bit, where instead of thinking about writing as an art, right? Like you're trying to craft something and it's an artistic skill that you've developed. It's thinking about words as value bringing assets. Like, well, you need to give value to the audience by having assets that you can release at a regular pace. And so like your words are an asset that's going to bring value to the audience, which will be worth this much in terms of links. Or there's this whole sort of terminology out there now where it's just about, you're kind of vomiting out these assets that are going to bring content. You got to be content creators. And for people who've been writing for a long time, I mean, it's a little distasteful, this way of thinking about it.
It absolutely is. And I think we were talking with Andrew Schultz about this. I think the biggest problem right now is content creation, because a lot of people are saying things but don't have anything meaningful to say, but they feel compelled to generate content generation.
I mean, we could just sit here and like fart into the microphone for an hour. That's content.
This is the advice I used to give aspiring nonfiction writers. Like what I observed in my own life is that what made you better was writing for editing. Right. So when you were writing for, like, this could be for a magazine, this could be rejected if it's not good enough. And if it's going to be accepted, it's going to go through rigorous editing or book writing. Like, hey, there's a manuscript acceptance stage. Like, you don't get this next check until they accept that manuscript, and they might not like it. Right. Writing for editing made you a lot better. Whereas I found that just blogging, for example, even blogging, which I really like, it didn't give you the same sort of deliberate practice, because you weren't writing for someone because you're not stretching yourself.
Right.
There's not someone who's going to pay you money for this.
You're not pushing yourself to do the absolute best.
Yeah.
It's like, this is good enough, and I'll move on to the next thing.
Put some money on the line, right? Like, okay, they're going to pay you for this article, but they're not going to pay you if it's not good. So then you stretch yourself and you get better at it. I mean, that's how writers used to get better.
And I think that's still how we can get better now. That's how we use our blog. In fact, we didn't even know they were called blog posts for like the first year.
We had a website and we wrote essays essays.
Yeah, and so we still call them essays now, but Podcast Sean is the best editor I know. And so like I did a 400-word essay, and there was 22 changes that he recommended to the thing in 400 words. But it makes me a better writer because I know that it's going to go through this process, and I actually am anticipating now what he's going to say, and even then I still come back with 22 edits in a 400-word piece.
I remember the first time Sean edited anything for us, like way back when. Josh sent me the file and he was like, "Why can't you edit like Sean?"
Well, also the first time he did anything for me, it really hurt my feelings, right?
Oh.
Because I respect him as an editor, but also like we want things to be perfect, but they're not going to be, and you're gonna have to get your feelings hurt a little bit.
You can't get better.
Yeah, that's the only. And now I'm seeking it out. I'm like, hey man, can you please look this over because I know you could really help the ending out on this.
That. So you really can't get any better if you're not willing to get your feelings hurt.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Tweet that podcast, Sean. All right, we got. I'm gonna do one more question here from Twitter. We're at the Minimalists on Twitter, by the way. What does a minimalist approach to digital productivity look like? To-do lists, calendars, and project management apps. What's the best way to navigate this world effectively?
God, that question stresses me out, man.
You have to be optimal.
Oh man.
Hey, Cal, how do you GTD?
Well, I'm a GTD Plus with my Bojo Pro, my OmniFocus.
Oh my goodness.
How do you look at productivity, man? Because to me, that has also become... It's a word that meant something and still means something to some of us, but I found that I am less productive now, but the things that I do produce, I think create more value. Yeah. Because tweeting all day is producing, it's productive, but is it effective?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a big productivity nerd. I mean, basically there was this life hacker movement in the early 2000s where there was this dream that if you had the right systems, right?
4-hour work week.
Right. Well, and then this is GTD, this is like Merlin Mann, 43 folders, right? And there's this idea, OmniFocus was really big back then. And the idea was if you have the right systems, that the whole thing can run on autopilot. So if you track things the right way, have the right rules, the right widget cranking assembly line, then you turn the whole apparatus on and it was going to produce work. And this whole edifice sort of fell apart because it turns out what is productivity? It's producing things that are really good. It's producing things that are so good they can't be ignored and trying your best to keep the rest of the junk from impeding on that too much. Like that's basically productivity, and that's where it basically evolved to. And so that's what really matters. So like to me, productivity systems, there's no magic box out there that's going to, if I just follow these rules, I'm going to produce more. Now, what it can be useful for is getting stuff out of your head. It can be useful for organizing things. It can be useful for getting your arms around your week and your day. And I care a lot about these things. But there's no magic system, right? So, I mean, what do I use? So, I mean, pulling from the GTD world, I think full capture makes sense.
What is full capture?
So if there's if it's an obligation that you've made, it should be written down somewhere. Don't keep it in your head. If you keep it in your head, it takes away mental RAM.
The other thing too is I'll put it in the steel trap in my head, but then like I can't open the trap.
He doesn't have the key.
Right. So yeah, so that should be written down somewhere that you review it a lot. Okay, fine, right. And then beyond that, I'm a big believer in weekly, daily planning. Okay. So like what I like to do is get my arm around the week, right? And it takes a couple hours. But you really sit and you look at the week and you look at your calendar and you just get a sense of how do I want to move the chess pieces
Especially
around.
when you're doing this with your partner too. Like it helps kind of...
like how are we going to move the chess pieces around? I mean, what I found is it's very ineffective if the way you run your day is like, let me just get to the day itself. And then I'll open up my email inbox or maybe a to-do list and just rock and roll.
And everyone else is then dictating your day.
Everyone's dictating your day. And also, even if you're not in your email inbox, but just doing this like David Allen, like let me just load up my task list and see what context I'm in and then start going through tasks. I mean, you get a fraction of the productivity of where you actually look at the whole week and what's coming up. And like, well, Monday is going to be all about writing and Tuesday is when I'm going to catch up on all these other types of things. And so that makes a big difference. And then I'm a time blocker. So I actually like to think about my schedule for the day, giving time jobs. So again, I don't like to drive off a list. I like to drive off of a plan for the day. Like during this hour, I'm going to be doing this. During these 2 hours, I'm going to be doing this. And so, yeah, I'm a bit of a planner. But I mean, all of this is just subordinated to making sure that you have enough time to produce the valuable stuff and that you're organized enough about all the other junk that it doesn't eat up all the rest.
So what I see here is like you've got a certain way you like to go about scheduling your time. And you don't rely on this magic bullet system to say, oh, well, the bullet journal is going to help me schedule my time better. Or I'm sorry, the bullet journal isn't going to schedule my time for me. Like, you might use something to help with your system. That's why there isn't this magic system, because I mean, I can name bullet journal, Evernote. These are two systems that I know people, different people use. They use them very, very well, but for me, like, it really isn't a great system for me. I think we get fooled where we trick ourselves and say, oh, if we get something like Evernote, if we get something like the bullet journal, all of a sudden, like, we're going to be these, amazing productivity geniuses.
You don't need a system to tell. I mean, you know what you need to be doing. We're very good at making plans. We don't need a system to tell us what to do. I mean, the tool I use for my weekly planning is a text file.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I don't need a structured tool to tell me, okay, you need to have X% this, and you have this and that, and all these other constraints on how to run the week. If you sit down and actually think about it, you're smart. You understand the unique constraints of that week. Hey, maybe you're on the road that week. It looks completely different than a week that you're at home, and you think about it completely differently. Just have a piece of paper or text file. Most flexible tech there is.
Yeah,
I can work out however I want to format it. I can work out. For me, it's often narrative. Like, yeah, okay, here's what we're doing. I'm on the road. So what I really want to do this week is, like, every morning, whatever, try to get this done. And then I have this big thing, this free time on Tuesday, whatever, afternoon. And so it's I used to call it freestyle productivity.
Yeah.
The key is the intention in the planning. Looking at your time, moving the chess pieces around, having a plan for what you want to do. Tools are only going to help you so much.
Right.
I mean, it's useful to write down the plan.
Sure.
So you have a text file or a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But the tool's not doing the planning for you.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's the thing we need to think about. Often we buy, I'm going to spend $17 on this app or $500 on this system, and we think that all of a sudden then we get mad because we're not organized the next week because we didn't actually do the work to use the tool. Yeah. So nothing wrong with using the tool per se, but you actually have to use the tool, right? Well, Cal, I want to thank you for joining us today. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, man.
I want to acknowledge you, man. I think you're creating some meaningful stuff for the world. Not just your current book, Digital Minimalism, but Deep Work and So Good They Can't Ignore You. Your blog as well, and folks can check that out at calnewport.com. But thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, man. You're awesome.
Hey, my pleasure. I mean, I've known you guys since what, 2012 when you guys first got
11.
started. 11.
I think we were at WDS together.
WDS,
right, yeah.
When I told the crowd not to follow their passion.
Yeah, I was still working in the corporate world when we met, Kyle.
You were still, yeah. So it's my honor to be here. I mean, you guys are doing this is. I got to tell you, like, what makes people most excited when I'm talking about various publicity, everyone's like, oh, you're going to see the Minimalist? It's crazy. I'll actually, like, I was at a speech not long ago, and the person who was ushering me around was like, oh, wait. And she perked up. She's like, but the Minimalists are going to be in town. I was like, oh, I know them. And now suddenly she cared. She's like, oh, you know the Minimalists.
Oh, man. We're on the journey together, man.
Yeah,
you're doing
anyways,
awesome.
I love it. You guys are doing great work.
Thanks so much, man.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother. All right, y'all. Love people, use things. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
The Minimalists.